right, perfect. Well, thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Geena Gomez. I'm an account executive at Darktrace based in the Miami office. And today we are going to be kind of focusing on the technology side and exploring some of the major security challenges that financial institutions are facing nowadays. Insider threat, data breaches, challenges with compliance and regulation. And as we covered a little bit earlier with Joanna, and you guys already know, banking and financial services have always been a major target, considering that digital financial data does drive global business. And these attackers are coming at them with full force with increasingly advanced attack capabilities. So for today, this is kind of what we're going to approach it like. We're going to get started with that rapidly evolving economy and how it is affecting the disruption that shapes this threat landscape today. Then we're going to cover some of those challenges, some of the threats that we're seeing nowadays, and then, of course, how we can utilize certain technology to make sure that we're keeping up to the developing threats that we're seeing nowadays, and cover some case studies in more specific detail, as well as highlight how some of this technology has been able to thwart some of these attacks that hadn't been seen before. So getting started in terms of understanding the financial landscape that we're living in right now, we are facing some unprecedented cyber challenges nowadays, increasing numbers of banking trojans and supply chain attacks, considering everything that has happened over the past couple of years with the pandemic. There has been a huge increase in remote workers, and all of this data is being distributed in different ways, and trying to maintain that visibility is key. Particularly within the finance industry, there is an urgency in terms of providing, ease to customers and accessibility and personalization of this technology. It does widen the attack surface for our clients as well. So making sure that we're having the full visibility as we evolve our technology to provide benefits for our customers, make sure that we're also keeping up and providing security to the same level, and making sure that we're able to not just rely on what we know to be bad and trying to anticipate what they could be in the future, but integrating into kind of what the health of an organization looks like. And we've also seen, many different regulations and compliance enforcements come about, and making sure that we're fully integrating alongside with those initiatives, and looking forward to the development of those, making sure that we fit into what the future of security looks like altogether. So giving a little bit of context to this threat landscape, we did see some numbers from Joanna too, and again, not to make it super scary, but it is what we've been seeing nowadays. In the past 2 years, 74% of banks and insurers experienced a rise in cybercrime. That is not something, unexpected for us to hear at this point, since we have seen it ourselves. But it's something to note that it's on everybody's radar. We need to make sure that we're evolving at the same pace that the risk is moving towards, and adapting consequently as well. And then what does that risk look like? In terms of the actual cost in money, we see $5.9 million as an average cost of a data breach in the financial sector. And then taking that a step further, of course, is going to be the reputational loss, potential fines, and remediation costs that might happen afterwards, which is another threat that we need to be able to anticipate and prevent fully if possible. We also know that email is the main entry point for attackers across all industries. And more specifically within a typical customer in the finance and investment space, we receive an average of 436 unique phishing campaigns a month in 2021, receiving on average 3 emails per campaign. So if we're tying together all of the risks that I mentioned previously and some of these numbers, we see that there is a need for comprehensive cybersecurity technology that covers the entire digital business, and not necessarily relying on prior approaches. So what does that look like? Now, we have seen time and time again that security teams operate under what we call the traditional rear view mirror approach. Sometimes this causes them to be unable to properly tackle some of these attacks, leaving them with a little confidence at times. So what this means is that going to be relying on the past to look into the future, to try to predict or anticipate attacks. A lot of traditional tools are reliant on rules and signatures, which inherently are retrospective to a certain degree, requires us to have an understanding of, where these vulnerabilities could lie and how we patch that up, and, prevent things from getting in the first place. But because of the fact that it is retrospective, it can allow for, lack of visibility and context. As we've seen time and time again, these threat actors are using creative approaches every day. They're using machine speed technologies as well to find new entry points within your system. So if you're going to be relying on what you know to be bad, that causes a potential opening point for somebody to find a creative new way to create a vulnerability in your system. And then having a one-size-fits-all approach, relying again on those known good or known bads, means that if there's going to be a response that's automated to any degree, it might not be as proportionate to that particular threat, considering that maybe there isn't a full understanding of the extent of this potential threat or that vulnerability within your system. And not having an understanding of a very precise picture of what is happening within your environment means that you might lack precision, it might be heavy-handed, or it might interrupt regular business conditions in an attempt to enforce them. So that's where the self-learning AI approach comes in. So we like to reference it as a digital immune system that integrates and lives within your data and learns what your business is from the ground up. It is complete self-learning AI technology, so it does not rely on rules and signatures, and it also doesn't rely on any training sets, considering that's unsupervised machine learning. Having a very adaptable technology means that it's going to have a response and an understanding that's completely unique to each business. Every business has its own challenges, and it's also growing at its own rates, has different business structures, different remote environments. So making sure that you have a technology that's completely integrated into your system and knows what's normal for you is going to be able to give you, again, that visibility and also understanding of when something is trying to get into your environment, what does that look like? And you can detect when those anomalies arise from the very beginning. Another key component of the self-learning AI technology is that, again, since it is adaptive, it's data agnostic. So it applies to environments of all different kinds of sizes and all different kinds of industries as well. And that also allows us to then use the same approach across the entire digital estate. So whether you have an on-prem physical network, whether you're in cloud, SaaS, endpoint, or email, having that approach of understanding kind of a sense of self for your environment is something that you can apply everywhere and then consolidate together to give you visibility on a single pane of glass. And then the key component, of course, referencing back to the fact that we're seeing novel attacks coming from different areas all the time, is that being able to focus on what's normal for your environment and focusing on anomalies, and then, of course, the malicious activity that's associated with them is able to prevent us from being attacked from something we've never seen before. We don't necessarily need to rely on known bads that we've seen in the past or historical attack data, but rather trying to enforce regular business conditions. So the enforcement is then the second component of that, and that's when we touch onto the autonomous response. So again, after using the self-learning AI component to have that understanding of self, understanding what's regular for your environment, if you then detect those anomalies, you want to be able to respond. And being able to use AI technology to do that autonomous response is crucial because it gets to understand in a very targeted way what these attacks are doing and then be able to respond to them and neutralize them proportionately. Of course, it's going to be doing that at machine speeds, which is crucial whenever there's going to be any kind of vulnerability. You don't want it to progress as much as possible. We like to say that the autonomous response component is like having an extra pair of hands that works 24/7, 365 at machine speeds, of course. So no vacations and no sleep time, but being able to make sure that you're going to stay ahead of any potential vulnerabilities that are going to take advantage of the fact that some people are going to be out of the office at certain times, et cetera. So being able to have that full scope visibility as to what's normal, then being able to respond directly and precisely to that specific vulnerability is what's going to allow business to continue uninterrupted. And again, tying it back to what I mentioned before, it does this across the entire digital estate. So you're able to get context for particular situations or maybe specific alerts that you're seeing in disparate areas of your network or within your email environment that if you had to triage it independently, you'd have to kind of get all of these notifications from different areas and paint the picture yourself. And having to do that, the time between gathering that information and coming to the conclusion of an attack can cause a huge loss for the business. So let's give some context for some of this technology and talk about some of the examples that we've been seeing throughout our environment. One moment, some notes here. So we've got some case studies that I've got lined up for us here. I've got 3. I'm going to go into the most detail probably with this one, just to kind of give a little bit more context into how the technology worked and how it was able to thwart this attack. So for this particular case study, Darktrace did detect multiple attempts by a broad campaign to attack vulnerable servers and customer environments. The campaign targeted internet-facing Microsoft Exchange servers, exploiting the recently discovered proxy logon vulnerability. And so while this exploit was initially attributed to a group known as Hafnium, Microsoft announced that the vulnerability was also being rapidly weaponized by other actors. And again, tying back to making sure that we're staying ahead with these unknown attacks coming through, unknown vulnerabilities that had not been detected before. Making sure that you have a disruption using AI in real time is going to, be a real lifesaver there. So here, self-learning AI observed that threat actors were attempting to download and install malware using proxy logon as the initial attack vector. For customers with the autonomous response, that malicious payload was intercepted at that initial point. So it stopped the attack before there was any further developments. With the customers that had Darktrace in their environments without autonomous response, the Darktrace immune system component, which is that understanding of self and the full visibility across your network, did identify an alert on every stage of the attack. So, even if there was if you weren't able to respond at the very initial component of it, if you didn't have the autonomous response feature activated, you can see that the Darktrace technology, that self-learning AI, is able to have such a deep understanding of what's regular for your environment that at every single stage of penetration of this malicious threat, it's going to be picking up on that every step of the way as it travels through. So generally at that point in the attack, the malware was observed acting as a generic backdoor, didn't have very much follow-up activity. Then various forms of command and control channels were detected, and attackers were installing some cryptocurrency miners in some of these instances. And then in general, once a foothold is established in a digital environment, that's when the actor will begin that hands-on keyboard attack, starting to exfiltrate data, moving laterally and deploying ransomware. Within this example, after the proxy logon vulnerability was exploited, the Exchange servers reached out to a malicious domain utilizing a PowerShell user agent. Darktrace flagged the anomalous behavior as this particular user agent had never been used before, and let alone to access a malicious domain, which had never been observed in the network either. So the malware executable was masqueraded as a zip file. So making sure that, we're able to detect even small ways that they're going to try to hide within your environments. So it was trying to further obfuscate the attack. Of course, the file was still detected to be highly anomalous, and especially if it was being downloaded and masqueraded even further. And then after the traffic was observed through the potential channels, there was some malware downloaded. The servers began to beacon out to several external destinations that had never been seen before. That particular download had never left this particular area either, through these encrypted connections. And it's because of the fact that they had never been contacted before in the organization, let alone in this beginning fashion. Darktrace was automatically able to begin that investigation of the incident using that autonomous response component to stitch together these events into one coherent narrative. And so that's the third component of having that detection, of understanding of what's normal for your environment. Then you have, of course, that autonomous response, which is going to protect from those vulnerabilities to travel within your environment. But of course, you also want to have the visibility of what is it that's going on within my network. What is the activities that's going on? Where is it connecting to? And also you want to make sure that it's able to be communicated in a way that you can pass along to the rest of your team. It's easy to read. You have everything that you need right up front. And if you want to get into more details, you absolutely can. And that's how we employ our cyber AI analyst. So this is the investigation component, which is actually how we display everything on our UI. The technology was developed after 3 years of training with our own SOC team and what triage looked like for them, and incorporating that self-learning AI with the detection component and then the actual response component, tying it together and stitching it with actually all of the other security tools out there that you may have, since we do full integration as well. So we see here an example of what an incident log looks like. They have a timeline up ahead that shows all of the different instances of these breaches that Darktrace was able to detect and some of the responses that were taken care of. So for customers with Darktrace Antigena, the Antigena autonomously acts to block all outgoing traffic to the malicious external points on the relevant ports. And the response actually happens within seconds of attack surfacing. So it does effectively contain an attack in the earliest stage without interrupting that regular business activity, even in a 0-day campaign. So I can go into more detail maybe on a one-on-one. We do have a live demo that, we can walk through different instances of insider threats, of ransomware, using actual real examples from some of our customers as well. But just kind of wanted to give a snapshot into what information you would be seeing that the technology is able to provide in a single pane of glass. I want to check in on time real quick. I want to make sure I'm not crossing over too much.
Yeah, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes, Geena. It's good stuff. One of the questions that Tony asked was trying to get more in-depth insights into the AI algorithms. I don't think we can cover that, Tony, in a few minutes. I'm going to set you up with Alexandra and Geena so they can give you a little bit more in-depth insights into what Darktrace is, so to speak, underneath the hood.
Perfect. Yeah, well, I actually did kind of go a little bit long on that first example. So I had 2 other ones that I'd be happy to kind of cover one-on-one if it's of interest to anybody. This is about some of an example of a malicious file that came through email. This was an accident from an employee, which, as we talked about in the previous presentation, human behavior can be sometimes the hardest one to train, but also the core of protecting, your environments. And here we see that Antigena also autonomously identified and was able to stop an attack because, again, it's able to detect those anomalies from the entry points and doesn't allow it to then travel deeper within your environment at that point. And then here we have another brief example about a mistake in a native cloud environment. This is something that we see quite often in configuration errors at times. People do the best that they can do, but these threat actors will get creative in terms of understanding, where they can poke and prod to enter and then take advantage of these vulnerabilities. But just to be mindful of time, I will stop there because I wanted to make sure if there are any questions that I could answer briefly in this time about the technology and maybe add some context, I'd be happy to do so.